Now, this conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is new in the American experience. The total influence, economic, political, even spiritual, is felt in every city, every state house, every office of the federal government. We recognize the imperative need for this development, yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications. Our toil, resources, and livelihood are all involved. So is the very structure of our society. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes. We should take nothing for granted. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals, so that security and liberty may prosper together.
Over 60 years ago, President Eisenhower warned about the grave implications of the massive influence of an immense military establishment combined with a large arms industry on our entire society. But unfortunately, his warning has largely been ignored. The notion of using military action in war to solve problems is now deeply embedded in our culture. Peace is never really given any serious consideration. Those in power, swayed by massive profits generated from conflicts and wars, can easily manipulate the public by using a compliant corporate media. Case in point, the Iraq War in 2003.
The danger to our country is grave. The danger to our country is growing. The Iraqi regime possesses biological and chemical weapons. The Iraqi regime is building the facilities necessary to make more biological and chemical weapons. And according to the British government, the Iraqi regime could launch a biological or chemical attack in as little as 45 minutes after the order were given. The regime has long-standing and continuing ties to terrorist organizations, and there are al-Qaeda terrorists inside Iraq. The regime is seeking a nuclear bomb, and with fissile material could build one within a year.
Simply stated, there is no doubt that Saddam Hussein now has weapons of mass destruction. There is no doubt that he is amassing them to use them against our friends, against our allies, and against us.
Saddam Hussein will continue to increase his capacity to wage biological and chemical warfare and will keep trying to develop nuclear weapons.
Completely consistent with that request that we say, yes, Mr. President, you have that power to go to war.
This resolution gives President the authority he needs to confront the threat posed by Iraq.
Let's act now to get rid of a tyrant who's abused and killed his own people, who is procuring weapons of mass destruction, substantial evidence to that effect.
The choice is disarming him by war or letting him have these weapons of mass destruction.
My colleagues, every statement I make today is backed up by sources, solid sources. These are not assertions. What we're giving you are facts and conclusions based on solid intelligence.
But we now know that Saddam has resumed his efforts to acquire nuclear weapons.
Someone is waiting for a so-called smoking gun. It's certain that we will have waited too long.
We don't want the smoking gun to be a mushroom cloud.
We cannot wait for the final proof, the smoking gun that could come in the form of a mushroom cloud.
Weapons of mass destruction.
Weapons of mass destruction.
Weapons of mass death.
They might fight dirty, using weapons of mass destruction.
There are ties between Saddam Hussein and al-Qaeda.
Anthrax, smallpox.
Dirty bomb.
Dirty bomb.
Iraq al-Qaeda connection.
Both of them want to see Americans dead.
War now seems all but inevitable.
Short of a bullet to the back of his head or he leaves the country, war is inexorable.
War is inevitable, and it is approaching inexorably.
Is war with Iraq inevitable right now?
I think it's 95% inevitable.
You, at this point, right now, tonight, don't see any other option but war. Do you?
I'm asking you, Ambassador.
I
don't think there's a viable option for the administration at this point. We're way too far out front in this.
Send us over there, guys. Let's get on with it. Let's get it over with.
After politicians and the media built up the hate and fear in the public, the war began. The war coverage was largely sanitized because showing the realities of war would be terrible for public perception. The true horrors and death of the war were almost completely hidden from view, yet the truth was that the government knew they were killing many Iraqis, including civilians.
Leaked Pentagon files obtained by The Guardian contain details for the first time of more than 100,000 people killed in Iraq following the US-led invasion. These reports prove that the US authorities were recording official statistics of Iraqi deaths, something which they have always denied. The filed reports identify all civilian and insurgent casualties, as well as coalition forces wounded and killed in action. The logs record a total of 109,032 violent deaths between 2004 and 2009. The logs state that 66,081 of those deaths were civilians.
The United States and its coalition partners respect the people of Iraq. We are taking unprecedented measures to spare the lives of innocent Iraqi citizens.
Initially, the Americans stated that they weren't recording a body count or casualty figures and left it to others. But they were. In the files, we found just over 109,000 deaths. With our software, the location of every one can be mapped to reveal that after 6 years of killing, barely a part of the country has escaped the bloodbath. Despite George Bush's assurance, the majority of these, over 66,000, were civilians. That's nearly 2/3. Also recorded among the SIGACTs, 176,000 wounded in total.
But the actual number of Iraqis killed was much higher. A 2013 study in PLOS Medicine determined that approximately 500,000 Iraqis died due to the war and subsequent occupation. And it was not only Iraqis that paid the price for war. Over 7,000 United States soldiers were directly killed, as well as over 30,000 that committed suicide as a result of psychological damage from the war. There were also other consequences of the war. The military uses a waste product of uranium enrichment called depleted uranium, or DU for short, in their munitions and ammunition. The military uses it because it's 1.7 times denser than lead, making it an effective way of piercing armored vehicles. The downside is that every round of ammunition leaves DU dust on everything it hits, contaminating the area, effectively turning it into a toxic waste site. DU is linked to DNA damage, cancer, birth defects, and multiple other health conditions. With a half-life of 4.5 billion years, the contamination is effectively permanent. In the years following 2003, the U.S. military dotted Iraq with over 500 military bases, many of them close to Iraqi cities. These cities suffered the impacts of bombs, bullets, chemical, and other weapons, but also the environmental damage of open burn pits on U.S. bases, abandoned tanks and trucks, and the storage of weapons on U.S. bases, including depleted uranium weapons. According to a 2007 publication of the United Nations Environment Program, 1,000 to 2,000 metric tons of depleted uranium were fired during 2003. For every individual killed in Iraq and Afghanistan, the U.S. dispensed 250,000 bullets into the environment. All this environmental contamination resulted in a massive increase in cancers and nightmarish birth defects. Please be warned, the following images are extremely disturbing.
we have noticed an increased incidence of childhood cancer, mainly leukemia, especially after the aggression on Iraq in 1991. Most cases came from all over the country, but most of cases came from the southern cities, mainly from Basra, Nasiriyah, and Simawa.
What did you find as you returned to Iraq this last time, Dar Jamal, about depleted uranium and its effect on Iraqis?
Overall, the country has seen a massive increase in cancer rates from the 1991 Gulf War up to present, even according to official Iraqi government statistics. In 1991, for example, there were 40 registered cases of cancer out of 100,000 Iraqis. By 1995, 4 years after that war, that number had jumped to 800 out of 100,000 Iraqis. And then by 2005, that number had doubled.
Dar, as you speak, I just want to say we're going to be showing images, and I want to warn our TV audience, for our radio listeners, if you want to go to the website, you'll be able to see the kind of images that that you captured, Dar, when you were in Iraq. Go ahead, keep saying what you were saying.
The most recent statistic I'll end with before I get into Fallujah and what these images are showing is that in 2005 we saw 1,600 Iraqis with cancer out of 100,000, so a massive escalation that continues. And going on to Fallujah, because I wrote about this a year ago and then I returned to the city again this trip, we are seeing an absolute crisis of congenital malformations of newborn. There is one doctor, a pediatrician named Dr. Samira Alani, working on this crisis in the city. She's the only person there registering cases, and she's seeing horrific birth defects. I mean, these are extremely hard to look at. They're extremely hard to bear witness to, but it's something that we all need to pay attention to because of the amount of depleted uranium used by the U.S. military during both of their brutal attacks on the city of 2004, as well as other toxic munitions like white phosphorus, among other things. And so what this has generated is from 2004 up to this day, we are seeing a rate of congenital malformations in the city of Fallujah that is surpassed even that in the aftermath of, in the wake of the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki that were, that nuclear bombs were dropped on at the end of World War II. So Dr. Samir Alani actually visited with doctors in Japan, comparing statistics, and found that the amount of congenital malformations in Fallujah is 14 times greater than the same rate measured in the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan in the aftermath of the nuclear bombings. These types of birth defects, she said, there are types of congenital malformations that she said they don't even have medical terms for, that some of the things they're seeing they've never seen before. They're not in any of the books or any of the scientific literature that they have access to. She said it's common now in Fallujah for newborns to come out with massive multiple systemic defects, immune problems, massive central nervous system problems, massive heart problems, skeletal disorders, babies being born with two heads, babies being born with half of their internal organs outside of their bodies, cyclops babies literally with one eye, really horrific, nightmarish types of birth defects, and it is ongoing.
So some sources of environmental exposure in the Iraqi population: bombs, bullets, explosives, all containing various heavy metals that are quite toxic to health. Military bases and junkyards. Junkyards are a major problem in Iraq right now. Miles and miles of them. You would be totally astonished by the amount of destroyed vehicles, huge military equipment, tanks that have just been left to weather, and all the stuff that's in them will eventually get into the environment and into the people's bodies. Open air burn pits, burned plastic, batteries, appliances, all of the above on every US military base from 2003 to 2010, when their use was declared illegal and they stopped using them. Some of these burn pits are as large as a football field. I will show you a few pictures of them. Here is one right outside of Baghdad. Another one, everybody can see this thick emissions. It's just incredibly toxic. For 7 years straight, These burn pits burnt on every US military base, 24/7, constantly. And lots of US military soldiers were exposed to the exhausts coming from these burn pits. So did women and children and everybody else who lived near them. This is also the data we collected in Iraq, in Fallujah. And what it shows you is increases in percent birth defects and also miscarriages. These are some of the conditions of the children in Fallujah. This is some more pictures of children from Fallujah. We just published this in Environmental Monitoring and Assessment.
This war, along with its associated horrors, had to be paid for by the average taxpayer, a price tag that came to a beyond enormous $6 trillion. The colossal figure reflects not just the cost of fighting, like guns, trucks, and fuel, but also the long-term cost of providing medical care and disability compensation for decades beyond the end of the conflict. Much of the cost of the war was just placed onto the national debt, meaning that later generations will be forced to pay the bill for this war. But while we were all saddled with the bill and debt, at the same time, many companies and individuals made off with staggering profits.
KBR, one of the main logistics supplier contractors for the US, we're talking like food, facilities, etc., got a whopping $39.5 billion in Iraq-related contracts. KBR's parent company, Halliburton's CEO, was paid a nice $42.6 million in 2004. What about Titan and Khaki, the two companies that provided the US with interrogators that were part of the infamous Abu Ghraib prisoner torture case? Khaki CEO made a fairly decent $22.2 million in 2004. And Titan, he takes the crown with a $47.2 million income in both 2004 and 5.
The U.S. happens to be the biggest arms supplier in the world. The U.S. has supplied countries like Israel, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt with complex weapons systems, even as their governments have been blamed for committing human rights abuses with those weapons. The thing is, the weapons industry is big business, worth $85 billion worldwide. U.S. companies, including Lockheed Martin and Boeing, sold more than $23.7 billion in arms last year to nearly 100 different countries. And arms exports have actually increased under Obama by 23%. The more war, the more profit. Now, Congress does control the export of U.S.-made weapons, but the defense industry keeps Congress on their side with $150 million in campaign contributions and lobbying last year alone. Pope Francis even called out the U.S. during a recent speech to Congress. He said the reason deadly weapons are being sold to groups and governments around the world is simply for money.
Money that is drenched in blood, often innocent blood.
In the end, no weapons of mass destruction were ever found. Hundreds of thousands of deaths, pain, suffering, the entire war was based on a lie.
The intelligence that we were operating off was correct.
The quality of our intelligence operation, I think we're better than anybody else.
We gathered a lot of intelligence. That intelligence was good, sound intelligence.
We know where they are. They're in the area around Tikrit and Baghdad and east, west, south, and north.
So it's going to take a period of time to find the people. I don't think we'll discover anything myself. It is not like a treasure hunt where you just run around looking everywhere hoping you find something. I just don't think that's going to happen. The inspectors didn't find anything, and I doubt that we will.
It appears that there were not weapons of mass destruction there.
You said you knew where they were.
I did not. I said I knew where suspect sites were, and
You said you knew where they were, near Tikrit, near Baghdad, and northeast, south, and west of there. Those are your words.
No one faced any consequences for their lies and actions. The corporate media moved on to other stories and accepted no responsibility for their part in this horror show. The suffering, death, and destruction were all swept under the rug. George Bush even joked about how no weapons of mass destruction were found. Instead of being horrified, the elite crowd listening to him laughed.
Those weapons of mass destruction got to be somewhere. But we get along well. Here I am saying, Dick, if the Hunan Palace doesn't get lunch here in 4 minutes, we're going out. Nope, no weapons over there. Maybe under here.
George Bush, the head of the group that orchestrated such destruction and terror, was rehabilitated into a quirky, caring, and likable person by the same corporate media that beat the drums for war.
Landscapes, dogs, and the classic fruit in a bowl. Those are all among a list of newly released paintings created by former President George W. Bush. The paintings were taken from the Bush family's hacked email accounts. And since they came from a hacker, CNN has decided not to show them. But we did get our hands on this work of art, courtesy of the office of the former president. It's a painting of the former family dog Barney. May he rest in peace.
He's actually become a pretty good painter.
It is good. Has he painted?
It was I'll just admit that this was a surprise to me when I found this out about a year ago. And he's doing it with a vengeance. So if you've got a dog, I'm sure, based on your past relationship, he would love to paint it.
I'm waiting for you to paint me. I want you to paint me.
I told you I was looking in those eyes.
All right.
Beautiful blue.
All right. Well, I'm waiting for my portrait. Let's talk about this amazing book. You really are a great painter.
Let's talk about the painting because now tell us how you started painting. When did this happen?
Getting a little bored. Times I'm busy. I was
all the brush had been cleared on the property.
Brush had been cleared. You know, I wrote these books, which surprised a lot of people.
Yeah. Right.
Particularly on the coasts.
You wrote like, what, 5 books or something?
They didn't think I could read.
Yeah.
Much less write.
There are two realities: the manufactured reality the public is fed through corporate media to keep everyone happy and compliant. That is used to hide the actual reality. The hundreds of thousands of Iraqi deaths, the more than 7,000 American deaths, the over 30,000 American suicides, the cancers, the horrific birth defects, the enormous costs of war, and the billions in profits made by corporations and individuals. That's the reality that the military-industrial complex, elites, politicians, corporations, corporate media don't want you to know or ever think about. But by not knowing the terrible truth, the same cast of characters can keep using the same playbook with more violence and war happening over and over again, causing widespread suffering and death until we as a world decide on a different path. A path of truth, justice, and peace. The choice is ours. The choice is yours.
Because it's always the same. When you fire that first shot, no matter how right you feel, you have no idea who's going to die. You don't know whose children are going to scream and burn. How many hearts will be broken? How many lives shattered? How much blood will spill until everybody does what they were always going to have to do from the very beginning? Sit down and talk!
Thank you for watching. References and links are down below. If you thought this video was valuable, please like and share. If you find that you disagree with anything, please respectfully state your views. We all learn when we share and consider other people's views. Thank you and have a stellar day.